we're gonna I'm gonna kind of interview them, and you'll get to. This is David Butler, Beth Winterburn, and Hilary Butler. So they are IPC members, and these are folks that we really wanted to get in front of you so you could hear about what they do and then interact with them some. So the way we're going to do the Q&A will be slightly different. Okay, so there's two ways you can ask questions, say, in the next 30 minutes. You can text your question to that number right there on the screen, and we will receive the question, okay? And that'll be part of how we get questions from you. The other way is you should have little pieces of paper and pens on your tables, and you can just write your questions down if you don't want to text them in or whatever, and we'll pick those up about 7:05 tonight and do Q&A starting about 7:10. Okay, does everybody understand that? That's kind of the approach to doing questions, and then that last part of the evening we'll ask them some of your questions. Okay, so let the interview begin. So y'all, I wanted to just have each of you just share a few minutes about your background and family, what you're doing now in connection to IPC, and also just what kind of art you make, and what that looks like in your life now to actually do that.
Yeah. My name is Hilary Butler, and I've been at IPC for about 15 years. I came here in college through RUF, and it's where I met this handsome fellow right there. And we married here 12 years ago, and we have two little boys, almost 4-year-old and a 1.5-year-old. And Jeremy, you wanted our background, like how we got to the arts? Yeah. So basically, grew up, as long as I can remember, always had crayons or pencils or something in my hand. I just always was so drawn to creating things, even from a young age. And that just continued all the way through to high school. And fortunately, had really supportive parents who paid a lot of money for art lessons and really encouraged a lot of art and even art as a career. So when it came time for college, it was just a natural progression to choose art as a major. So I spent my freshman year in the art department, and I absolutely loved it. But towards the end of that year, at the ripe age of 18, I thought that I was burned out and thought that I needed a break. And so now I know that's called resistance, is what we call that, and you just need to push through it. But I didn't know that at the time, and so I switched majors to English and ended with an English and art history degree. And then after school, worked several jobs. I was an English teacher for a hot minute, and then worked an office job for a while and got a graphic design degree while I went back and just bounced around a bunch. And my heart's cry was really to be painting and to be in the studio. And so 8 years ago, I made a very bold leap of faith to pursue this as a full-time job. David was really supportive, and haven't looked back ever since. So taught myself everything along the way. It's been an interesting ride, but built the business to where it is today. And so I am an abstract artist. I do this work that you see right here, this blue and orange. I do large abstract oil paintings, and what that looks like is I have a full-time job that I cram into part-time hours and hang out with our little boys, and just honored that I get to show up every day and get to do this for a living.
Good job. Okay, my name is Beth Winterburn. Peter and I, my husband, sitting right there, we joined, I believe, in 2017. We were trying to figure that out, IPC. We have 3 kids. Davany is 13, Thompson is 11, and Ann Harris, or Effie, for y'all of those that know her, is 7. Okay, I'm going to go to the top. So I've been interested in art since I was very young as well, but probably the first time that I really felt like a real connection with art was in high school. I had an amazing high school art teacher, shout out to the high school art teachers here, who just really gave me a different perspective of art. She not only taught how to make art, but she really honed in on how to analyze and how to critique. And so she would grade us very rigorously on critiquing a piece of art. So we had to sit there and take all the parts of it and talk about them and get really specific down to the nitty-gritty. So I think I fell in love with it in high school. And then another teacher that knew me pretty well in high school, as I was graduating, suggested that I should try architecture because I loved math as well, which is actually a more common pairing than you would think, art and math. So he recommended that I do that, and so I was accepted into the architecture program at UT Knoxville. I started there in the architecture program, but then the building at UT is split. It's a really cool building. The interior is designed like a cruise ship, and so you can see the whole interior of the building at all times. So half the building's architecture and half is art, and I kept spying on the art side and watching them carry all their cool art supplies and thinking that's really where I want to be. So slowly, through one way or another, found my way over there, and actually ended up mostly in the photography department, doing darkroom. Still, film was still the major part of the photography industry. Digital hadn't hit yet, so I spent most of my time in the darkroom. So I graduated with a Bachelor of Arts in Fine Art with a focus in photography. Then after college, took a long break, moved to Dallas to do RUF with SMU, and that's where I met Peter. He was an intern as well at Clemson. He is a year older than me, so he came back here to start law school, and we were long distance, yada yada, got married and moved to Memphis, and then basically took a long time off because we had 3 kids fairly quickly, and he was getting through law school, and so I just kind of set all that aside for a while, and then, would do kind of things here and there. But people, of course, that I went to college with would say, oh, you're an artist, can you do this for me? And so, I was doing things a little bit here and there, and actually doing photography shoots here and there as well. But when we moved into the house that we're in now, I finally had like a dedicated studio. So I was able to start creating work again, and really thought this was just going to be like my outlet. I just needed a place to create, and so thought that that's all that it would really be. And then as I started making more work, it just snowballed, and I thought I got to figure out what to do with this stuff. And so that's kind of how the business was born. It was very organic. So my work is, I actually still have a very mathematical approach to my work, counting lights and darks. I count things all the time. I use a lot of photography principles in my work. One in particular is called the rule of thirds. If you've ever worked in that industry or are familiar with it, you mentally divide an image into 2 horizontal and 2 vertical lines, like a grid, and where those grid points meet is where you kind of place your item or your focal points are that instead of the center, so it draws the viewer's eye into the composition instead of just glancing right at the middle. So there's different things like that that I still draw on from that background. My work is an exploration in contrast, tension, and resolve, and I feel like a mad scientist a lot of times. I love the process of just playing with materials and figuring out what they do. I'm also super thankful to do this and glad that I can adapt my schedule to 3 kids and that craziness. I'm also full-time. Yeah.
And there's me. My name's David Butler. I am married to Hilary Butler. Our 2 children, Cedar, is our 4-year-old, and Fox. They're also our full-time jobs, which leaves between ECS, where I teach the AP classes, the painting classes and ceramics, and then our boys, and then what's left over is when I start doing my other full-time job, which is painting. I do representational work. I do singing. I do watercolors in Memphis. It seemed appropriate to capture a city built on water and cotton, to use water and cotton fibers to represent the city that we live in. I grew up. I'm the middle of 6 children. That's important because it kind of there's 5 boys, 1 girl, and for my parents, it was, if I think the 2 that I have are a full-time job, they were doing everything. But they really encouraged us to participate in both athletics and arts. And so when I remember in kindergarten winning it was like a soap-paste snowman contest of some sort, and I remember winning a ribbon. And at that point, that was enough encouragement for my mom to kind of say, if you're interested in art, let's pursue this. And so I took lessons growing up, and it was always a tension between like pursuing athletics, which I think is in the South, that's what everybody does. So, doing sports, but also in the same way pursuing art along the side. So it was charcoal lessons, it was watercolor lessons, and having art teachers who encouraged us and were very very positive was really, I think, as a response to, I'd say it was really a response to how the art education was for my parents. They were like, we found teachers who loved teaching y'all, really encouraging for y'all. So we were able to do that. There was one summer I think I traded mowing the yard to do, mowing my art teacher's yard to do art lessons, which was really nice. But it was always a tension between those two things. I wanted to be known as an athlete, but also wanted to pursue art. And so when it came time to go to school, my art teacher, I remember asking, like, she was like, what do you want to do? And I said, I was thinking about doing maybe like engineering or something like that. And she's like, I think something to the effect of like, that would be, that'd be sacrificing the gift that you have. And I remember that really stuck with me because it was somebody who had invested in me, saying that you have real promise. And so I knew I was doing something in the art department. And then once I got to school, I remember helping somebody, they were interested in drawing portraits or whatnot. And I remember just loving watching somebody light up, learning how to do that. And I was like, this is something I could do every single day. And so at that point, walked back from it was over spring break, and I walked in and said, I want to do art education. And so I started teaching at ECS in 2001. So I've been there for, 18 years. And then with watercolors, that was the thing that I started off with. I started off learning watercolors. That was the first set of art lessons that I took. And so when I started building a professional career, in some ways I went back to my first love, which was watercolor. I started painting scenes in Memphis because when I came back from college, I actually got to explore the city a little bit on my own and kind of get to know the things that I thought I knew before. And so that's been really fun to do that. It wasn't until after I think Hilary and I got married that all the watercolors went from like the stack of paintings in a box, because you're not going to be just, no one's going to know that you paint if you keep it in the closet the whole time. So she really basically said, we need to show this. And so after we got married, that's when I think my work actually went out into the public. And so that's been really encouraging to see the response that people have when they see your work and understand kind of what you do.
That's great. Thank y'all for that. To follow up just for a few minutes then, I'd like for each of you to just talk about like your process, how you approach creating something, the thoughts that go through your mind as you flesh out what you see as your calling to be an artist in your specific medium, or even some of the pieces we have up here.
Okay. If you want to love on an artist, sit down with them and ask them about their process, but be prepared to be there a while. Promise, we're going to keep this to a minute. Just a few minutes, 3, 4 minutes, 5 minutes, 6 minutes. Ben's going to bring up this laptop so we can see what we're doing. I'm going to try to do this. Okay, here we go. All right, thank you very much. So I work from a process, it's an old master's process called studies. And simply, it's just what it is you work out all of your ideas, you get all of them out on really, really small, so you can practice and you can hone it and you can get it right, so that when you're ready to move to the big piece, you know exactly what you're doing. So basically, you're creating a roadmap for yourself. So what that looks like for me is I love working on paper as well as canvas, but paper is such a fun medium. And so I tear up all these pieces of paper into squares and I tape them all out. It's like a lot. And I tape them all, and then I've got a lot of ideas that just come, and I've got an inspiration wall, and sometimes when I'm working on one collection, I'll think, oh, I want to try this idea. So I'll draw it out real quick, paint it out, and then stick it on the side. And so I've got all my inspiration. I get it all at one spot. So it's like a big, giant brain dump. It's great. And so paint them all out, and then what I do is you'll see this next slide. I'm pointing it here. I never hit that button. There we go. Oops. So then I hang them all up. And basically what you do is I start to see patterns start to form. And so I'll look and I'll see, like, do I like this color palette? Do I like the direction that this composition is going? And I'll pick out the pieces that I really, really like, and then I'll pull down the pieces that I'm not so fond of. And you really do. You start to see, like, oh, I think I picked all these pieces because I really like these blues that it's going, or I like the shape that this is making. And that's what we call a series. And that's how you grow as an artist and how you really push yourself, is you do a body of work that's centered around basically one central concept, so you can just basically hone that concept and really kind of grow in that niche area. And then you do another series, and then you pick another little area, and you kind of grow in that little niche area. And that's how your work evolves and grows over time. So once I have these small pieces that I really, really like, I am ready to move on to the big one. And twice a year, I'll sell these so that collectors can buy work at an introductory collector's price point. And those are really fun to do. So this is a picture. So you saw this former slide, you saw the littles. And so the one that's on your far right, this is what it's like painted up real big, like. And this one is 48 by 48, so you can see like how they scale. And they look different when they're bigger. You have to use different brushes and different methods, but basically, like, I've worked out the basic concept, and now I get to flesh out the details and kind of let it morph and grow on a big scale. So for this series, a lot of what I've been doing the past couple of years is exploring kind of this idea of how does this art work in a circular form, and basically, like, how does circular tension kind of interact with that? And so basically, like, I have this circular form, and sometimes composition works really well. The more you take away from it, the better it starts to look. So basically, I'm kind of trying to play around with the idea of, like, how can I get as much of a circle without having as much of a circle as possible? Really artsy for you. And so it's just a really, really fun process by which I'm playing with colors. I'm trying to balance out my colors. These I did a lot more heavy on, like, I would pick like either a warm color palette or a cool palette and just add in some extra complementary colors. But, and so, like, if you look in the, like, I guess this kind of looks like a G, like the line part of the G, you would see, like, where the circle kind of comes around, but then it kind of, like, there's the tension right there, like, it doesn't quite resolve. Because, like we've learned about this month, like, we have this responsibility to express, like, the whole story. You know, it's not just always this. I used to, I think, when I started off, thought that I used to have these, like, perfect pieces that I wanted to present to people. But now I'm really, the more I'm growing in this, starting to really want it to show people just, like, the humanity in it. And, like, my hands have been there. A real person is doing this piece. And it's not going to be perfect. And so you said this tension that we live in between, like, the already and the not yet. And I just feel like these pieces are really expressive of that.
Awesome. Thank you.
Are we done? Do we have more time?
Were you still going? Sorry. Wow. We're good. Go ahead.
Part two.
That was not planned.
Part two.
Communication.
Part two. I'll speed up. So, and so this is basically a picture so y'all can see what it looks like to scale. So this is like a big 48 by 48 piece, and I am kind of small, but that's what it looks like. And a lot of people look at abstract artwork and they think, like, they tend to hate on it. And I used to kind of be in this camp too, like, my kid could do that, so whatever, dumb. And until I tried it, thought that too. It's actually really hard, because when you're doing an abstract piece, you're trying to take a very broad concept and you're trying to shrink it down, and you're trying to create a piece that looks like everything and nothing, but, like, the eye can just move very easily over the piece. Like, it's just really satisfying to the eye. And that takes a lot of love and time and effort. And there's a lot of moving pieces that are involved in that. And I wanted to show y'all this next picture. This is what my head looks like, if that makes any sense to y'all. This is what the ideas look like. This is what the colors look like. I just have, like, constant color palette, overwhelm, and I just want to paint all the colors all the time. And I have to just constantly remind myself, like, bring it in, rein yourself in. And, like, sometimes when I'm painting, like, in that color palette, is where my best ideas come from. And I'll see, like, a little square, and I'll take a picture of it, or I'll paint it out, and, like, that's where I get those best, great ideas. And I love using bold colors. I love reflecting that side of life. I just want my artwork to bring just life to people. And it's really, really great when I get feedback from clients. Like, I see this in my house, and it just brings me so much life every time I see it. This week on the phone, I have my most prolific collector is 91 years old. She lives up north, and she is adorable, and she calls me every time I have a collection, and she's so cute. She just says, these paintings bring me so much joy, and she has brought a lot of them, and it's wonderful. But apparently they're bringing her immense joy every day. Almost done, Jimmy. And this other piece I wanted to show y'all too, one thing I've really been exploring lately is, like I've talked about before, just the fact that I want people to be part of it. I think the collectors to be part of the process. And so I used to think, this needs to be perfect, and I would clean things up or clean up a drip here and there, but I'm letting a few more of those shine through. I'm scraping a lot more. This little, you see that rubber scraper is my new buddy. I love him. And I'm having a lot of fun, doing a layer and scraping some off, and there's always a surprise as to what's underneath that I had forgotten about or didn't know was there. And sometimes those are some of my favorite parts of the painting that shine through. And again, for scale, and just this last one, I just wanted y'all to see, this is just, I wish everybody could come in the studio and smell it and get, and see the textures, and there's just paint everywhere, and it's just one of the most incredibly inspiring environments to work in. And I just feel so incredibly blessed that I don't get to just do this as a job every day, but this is a career. So I think that sums it up. There's a little close up. All right.
Okay. I hate being read to, but this is worth reading out loud, so I'm going to go through it real quick. I love this quote. The church needs artists because without art, we cannot reach the world. The simple fact is that the imagination gets you, even when your reason is completely against the idea of God. Imagination communicates, as Arthur Danto says, indefinable but inescapable truth. Those who read a book or listen to music expose themselves to that inescapable truth. There's a sort of schizophrenia that occurs if you're listening to Bach and you hear the glory of God, and yet your mind says there's no God and there's no meaning. You're committed to believing nothing means anything, and yet the music comes in and takes you over with your imagination. When you listen to great music, you can't believe life is meaningless. Your heart knows what your mind is denying. We need Christian artists because we are never going to reach the world without great Christian art to go with great Christian talk. So we will come back around to some of those ideas later, but that says a lot of what I wanted to say. This is a little peek into my studio. I have a studio in my home, which I'm very, very, very thankful for. I have outgrown it, but I make it work. I paint primarily on the floor. There are 0 easels in my studio. When I work on large paper pieces like this, I actually use a really giant roll of watercolor paper. I can go 48 inches on one side all the way down to 7 feet on the other. My personal paper process is very physical and engages all of my senses. I actually stretch that entire sheet out, and I have to lay on it and push it, and by the end, it's like I've done a whole yoga workout to get it prepped and ready for painting. So next one. So I start in a similar way to how Hilary starts. These are all sketchbook pages. And this is the place where I play and experiment on these small pages. It's less intimidating to me to start small, and so I just am very free on these. Each of these is about an 8x8 piece of paper, which there are samples right there on that table afterwards if you feel like looking at those. These pages have evolved over time and have led to smaller works that are a little more official and a little more intentional. And then each of these pieces is actually from a different collection of work that spans over 4 or 5 years. And you can see how they kind of build on each other. Specifically, I wanted to talk about this body of work, which most of my collections do explore a lot of the things that I mentioned earlier, just about what my work is about. But this particular collection has stayed with me for a while. And I've called it How You to Me, and it's a deep dive into the exploration of human relationships. Specifically, introverts versus extroverts, dominant versus reserved personalities. As you can see in some of these, there are heavier, darker colors that represent sort of the weightier, more domineering, or maybe that's not the right word to say, dominating or extroverted personalities, and then those lighter values kind of lift the pieces and take away some of that heaviness. And what these are about is just how 2 very different types of people can either be in conflict or can come together to create beauty despite our differences. It's an exploration of the tension of the already and the not yet, very similar to what Hilary said, that there's messiness in it, but all these things relate to one another. And that gold line that you see, especially in those top left and that larger piece, I've been using that for a while because initially I needed like a neutral, and a lot of times metallics can behave as neutrals, but this particular has taken sort of its own life. Number one, it acts as a contrasting neutral element, so it's a sharp line against these very washy colors and shapes. But it also, to me personally, represents just this eternal aspect of time and purpose. It's gold, and so I think about the eternal streets of gold and how that line goes through and brings all these pieces together. So you see all these sort of blobs or shapes or whatever floating out on the piece of paper, and as soon as I draw that line, it immediately brings cohesion and direction to the piece, and I know exactly what the next move is going to be based on what the line tells me. So it's kind of a communication between me and the piece, which also kind of goes back to why they're created, just that relational aspect. And then also just that you don't always see the breaks, but that there's always a purpose and sort of an intentional story written for us that the Lord has written, and He knows the beginning and the end, but there's going to be some hidden things from us along the way that we won't see, but it all comes together in His care. And then, let's see. Also, the one on the right was part of a really cool collaboration that I was able to do. That's one thing that's really fun for artists to do is, collaborate with other artists. And a ceramicist and then another painter reached out to me and said, hey, how about us all doing a collection together? And so we chose a color palette, and then this is actually, there's a word, chiaroscuro, I can't say it right, but it's an Italian term which means light and dark. So if you see like old portraits where there's like a face and their face is very light on the one side and then it's like black and really dark and there's huge contrast, that's what these pieces were kind of challenged to do that in these pieces. That light is supposed to be on half the subject, which would give them a strong like three-dimensional shape and sense of volume. So I had to figure out how to do that abstractly, which was really a cool challenge. So the next thing, paper is really my jam. I love it. But over the years, as I've worked on paper, I've really wanted to challenge myself to work on canvas because a lot of people, including myself, just feel like as an artist I should have a canvas collection. And so that's been a goal of mine. But all the materials behave very differently depending on, the canvas or the paper. So first I started with just trying to figure out how to get the canvas or get the materials to behave on the canvas. And so I had to experiment with this, and this has been like a multiple 5-year, 6-year process of trying this out. And that piece right there on the easel is one of those. And I just stripped away everything else and focused on the ink itself, and so that I could kind of master that as much as possible before I introduce other elements. And then lately, I've just taken those concepts and tried to merge those with the concepts on the paper and tried to come up with something that ties those together. So these recent pieces especially represent that sort of bringing those two ideas together. And then there's a piece actually on the bottom, which you may or may not be able to see depending on where you are, where that represents what I'm kind of working on right now, and also this piece as well. Instead of keeping those elements separated, I'm now challenging myself to lay them on top of each other and kind of deconstructing some of the elements to see if they're as effective, if they're deconstructed, and see if they communicate the messages that I'm trying to say as clearly when they're not in that same order. So it's just kind of a new thing I'm exploring, and we'll see where it goes.
And now for something completely different. So, my work is representational. I do watercolors of the city of Memphis. And so because I am completely jealous of these two ladies because they get to do what they love all day, like just working on their painting and stuff like that. Not to say that I don't love working with the students at ECS, but that they get to spend all day like zoned out on their work. So oftentimes, in terms of my process, I am taking the gaps of time that I have and going and finding scenes and places that are in town, and I'm taking photographs because oftentimes the light isn't that great at 10 o'clock at night. And so I will go and take lots of photographs and images and then come back to my studio and work them up from there. This is one of the trolleys downtown, and with one of the things that I kind of default to getting into the details. Like I want things to be a lot like tighter and neater and more angled and things like that. And so where my struggle is like telling myself to stop and sometimes leave things a little unfinished. Much of what they said is like the idea with painting is that in some ways the thing that makes an original in some ways so valuable is that you have these decisions that artists make about when is it ready? You know, when is it resolved and when is it still unresolved? And so sometimes the leaving of an area like leaving of an area unfinished or a brushstroke in a particular way is where you spend most of your time as a decision making, and I guess as artists spend their time. Like this is one of my earlier works, say similar trolleys, and I'm trying to like compare and contrast the two. Like I started off trying to make sure everything was the right color, everything was exactly as you saw it, and then as I've kind of progressed, I keep moving toward trying to bring in in some ways a brighter story, or bring in an infusion of color to make it more dynamic. Primarily I do Memphis scenes. There are times when we've ventured outside of our place, and so that's the Taylor Grocers down there. Like the struggle that I have is what is too tight and what is too loose. Especially with the representational work, is like, you know, when do you need to write every single letter and make it photographic? One of the things that I share with my students is that, like, if people want a photograph, they'll go take a picture. If they want an original work of art, you're going to have to give them something that is different. You're going to have to give them something that represents the humanity and in some ways, the imperfections and something that you have brought to that conversation. And so oftentimes for me, it's working with color, basically trying to inject a more vibrant story, because oftentimes we see or remember just kind of like the way that they are, not necessarily the way they ought. And so oftentimes, like when we see something that's brand new, it kind of has a vibrance to it, it has a crispness to it, but over time it starts to decay. So I kind of want to, you know, interject those colors in those, like especially like in the shadows. Most people don't think about like purple and reds and blues and shadows, but oftentimes when we think about shadows, we think about like darks and grays. When oftentimes that would, like if we have that in a work, it's going to kind of in some ways muddy the conversation. And so it makes it a more energetic and vibrant work. One of the reasons why you'll see, you know, trolleys and stuff like that is because I love those came after I left high school. They were not a part of my high school experience. Most people were like ready to pack their bags and get out of town. But when they started reinvesting in downtown, this was like, for me, it was like a symbol of like a resurgence or a rebirth of the downtown area. Suddenly people went downtown just to spend $1.50 to ride these things. And I just thought it was a great, you know, representation of like what it means to kind of invest in the place that you're in. And so other works, like oftentimes I'll end up doing, like this is out at Jones Orchard. Sometimes I want to find places that everybody knows because they resonate with those places because they have memories of going to that places as a child, or it was like their place for their first date. But then other times it's just like, this is an old dilapidated barn out at Jones Orchard. And to me, there's something, the tension of the colors, whether it be the gray neutral backgrounds, but then that, you know, the fierce contrast of the red and greens fighting with each other. You also have the tightness of the boards versus the looseness of the greens. And so when you're looking at art, you're always looking at what are the decision making that the artist has made. I'd say there's typically three types of work. There's work where I create all the decisions for kind of the project. Other times we end up doing like some commission work. And commission work, somebody's like, this place means a lot to me. can you help me visualize this thing? And so this is a work that was commissioned. Somebody's like, this is our family property. It's meant a lot to our family. Can you bring this project alive? And so oftentimes if you see work kind of shifting from one place, like from one style to the next or different than another thing, sometimes it's kind of who starts the project. Sometimes the project is started from somebody coming to you, and other times it's where you start the project and you take it forward. But if I'm out in Memphis, I'm taking pictures because I want it to kind of, in some ways, capture the memory of what we went to. Well, this is like the Moon River Festival at the Levitt Shell. This is a river trip that I took with some men here at the church. And basically, we're paddling the Mississippi River. And I love the looseness of the water because, I mean, you're out in the Mississippi, which you shouldn't swim in alone. But like the looseness of the water, because that whole trip is about the water and the relationships. And I just thought this one really captured, in some ways, it was just a powerful experience for me. But even like going down to like the rendezvous. This one I call it ribs in the window because what you see the most is like that guy's ribs as he's reaching for the next thing. But everyday scenes of things that we experience, part of it is paying attention to what is happening around you. And while you're out and about, these kind of photographs or these experiences are happening. It's just a matter of taking time to sometimes stop, take a picture, capture it, and frame it correctly. At school, there's another type of work that I end up doing is they have me illustrate their theme verse for the year. Each year at school, the school has a theme verse that kind of guides them for the year. And I was just going to kind of show you that process. They will give me the verse and they basically say, okay, now can you run with it? I'm like, which is great because they have a lot of faith and they give me the artistic freedom to kind of go with what's there. And this year's verse was, the theme was abound. And it says, may the God of hope fill you with joy and peace, believing by the power of the Holy Spirit that you may abound in hope. I was like, that's a beautiful verse. And it has all the great, literal narrative things like hope and peace and joy that you get to paint. I'm like, well, how do you paint hope and how do you paint peace and how do you paint joy? So it was a lot of like ethereal ideas in this thing. And so, and that's kind of part of the struggle with, I'd say the struggle, but also the awesome responsibilities that artists get to take the supernatural and the unseen and try to make that into a relatable conversational piece. And so we were sitting on our couch and we were sitting there talking about like, how do you paint hope? And Hilary reminded me of this piece by Frederick Watts where it's a blind, basically they're playing the lyre and they're blind and they're listening to the one string on a broken harp. And the idea of hope is like everything's gone. They can't see, they can only hear to the one sound of this musical instrument. And in the conversation it was like, hope is blind. And it was an interesting idea, like sometimes it's that great faith in the thing that you can't see yet. And so for me, it kind of changed like the conversation of how do you show abounding in hope. And the concept of being abound was that, hope being blind, and so using Braille and symbols, because oftentimes that you've seen in abstract work, but also literal work, there's a lot of symbols that are being used. And so used like a symbol of Braille to spell out joy and to spell out peace and to spell out hope to create this work here. The idea being abounding, basically the waters in the Genesis account talked about the waters were filled with fish. Like teeming means like to fill or overflow. And so at the top, just below where it says abound, is the words hope spelled out in Braille. So they're abounding in hope, but also what they're feeding on is is Braille spelled out saying joy and peace. So they're being filled with hope or filled with joy and peace while abounding in hope using symbols that are I'd say less traditional, but not less intentional. So that's a lot of the work that I'll do out at school, basically taking the verses and illustrating them so they can be teaching tools for both our elementary and upper school campuses.
Wow. That's amazing. All your answers are amazing. Your work is great. it's so fascinating to hear you describe the way you approach these things, think about it, enter into the work, and then work to produce something. It's remarkable. So I think we are going to pause for just a second. If you have questions that you've written down and want to hand those in, just raise your hand and someone will be around to pick those up. But you can always text the questions too now. So if you've texted questions in, we'll look at those. But I'm going to ask them one more question and then go to yours in just a second after we've gathered those up. So last question before we go to theirs is, describe your sense of vocation and calling in this area. What is your calling, responsibility specifically as Christian artists? We've heard you mention themes or references to theological ideas or biblical ideas. So I'd love to hear you talk about that more directly. Yeah.
This is a hard one because not because I didn't know what I wanted to say, but because I had so much. I have this folder in my phone that I keep, and anytime I hear talks or read quotes, I just file it away. And so Jeremy asked this question, and he gave us this tiny little time limit. And so I tried to just pick, like, gosh, what would I want to say? What's been on my heart? And this is I think the thing that I've really been chewing on. And the longer I do this job, the more and more I'm starting to understand, like, just how close I am to the heart of God when I show up to work every day. And if you look in Genesis, the very first attribute we see of God is creator. And just a couple chapters later, he says that I'm made in his image. And so if in the image of God, one of his attributes is creator, then I carry that attribute as well. And it's a job I take very seriously. And really cool, though, that not only is he creator, but that he invites me in and he allows me to co-create with him. And not just that, and I can't create anything from nothing. He's the only one who can create something, just speak, and it exists. But the really cool thing is he made all of these elements. He made form, line, shape, texture, color, composition. And he gave them to us, and I just get to rearrange them. And then he gave me this unique voice that I can use to rearrange these things, and I can put it on a canvas every day. And the really cool thing is I walk into my studio, and I get a blank canvas. It's formless, it's void of anything. And I breathe life into it, and I add color and shape and variety and all these things. And I'm realizing, like, oh my gosh, I'm acting, and this is what acting in the image of God is, with the talents and the gifts that he's given me. And when I really think about that, it's just mind-blowing. Like, in the same way that, like, a doctor heals because God is the healer, or a lawyer fights for justice because we serve a God who longs for justice. And so also, when we're taught about creating original works, we're taught that, like, to create something that's, like, truly yours, that comes from you, the interesting thing is that you actually have to borrow from a lot of things. Because, right, we didn't invent anything. There's nothing new under the sun. We're just rearranging. So, like, every day I wake up and I'm just taking, like, 100 different fragments and pieces, broken things, and I'm putting together and I'm making something whole. And I just kept thinking about that verse in Isaiah where he describes God's people as the repair of the broken. And I just love that verse, and I just keep chewing on that. And I love the message, and I looked it up, and it translates it this way, and it says, you're going to be known as those who can fix anything, restore old ruins, rebuild and renovate, and make the community livable again. And that's what we do. That's what we do as artists. We rebuild and we renovate, and we get to push back the darkness just a tiny little bit each day. And when I walk into my studio, I put something good and true and beautiful into the world, and I tell the darkness, you aren't going to win today, because I'm doing something good. And that's a really good day. And I'm just so thankful that we have a God who condescends to us and invites us in on his process and says, hey, not only am I going to create, but you get to create with me. And not just us, but everybody here. We're all created because we're made in the image of God. And whatever our jobs look like, if we do anything different today than we did yesterday, we've done something new and we've acted in his image. And it's a really beautiful thing.
I thought about this a lot too, and we kind of each had so many things we could have said, of course, but when I think about the question, what is our calling / responsibility as Christian artists particularly, number one thing I thought was that we are called to do what we do with excellence. So when I think about, was it worth going to college and spending all that money on this? Absolutely. Like, we have invested years and time and all of this. When you speak to a professional artist, you're talking to somebody who's been doing this for a very long time, and for a lot of us, and just we're called to do that with excellence, and it's to celebrate the glory of the Lord and how beautiful and perfect He is. And so, in a similar way, I feel a lot of the things that Hilary was saying And then another thing I thought about was just that as Christian, particularly as Christian artists, that we are called to tell the whole story of the gospel in our work. That, there's an unbelieving world that, like you can walk into an art museum, and I do this a lot, and I see work, and it just feels gratuitous. It feels like there are, there's not a lot of, there's no hope. It's just sad, and it's hard, and it's almost like there's been a question that's put out there with no answer. And that is the world we live in. There are a lot of questions that are out there and a lot of stuff that's put out there without resolution. But as Christian artists, we have an answer. We have Christ. We have the Redeemer. And so to be able to tell that whole story in our work, so when we talked about, having tension, having unresolved things that can resolve, the gold line in my work, the way that Hilary was talking about, completing the circle, but there's still being tension there, that the way David talked about, the things not being quite perfect, like color washes and things being reinterpreted to represent more life and vibrancy than what we actually see. Like, that's when I think about being a Christian artist, is that we have the whole story to tell, and that we're called to tell that whole story and to represent the full truth.
Yeah, and to piggyback on that, the idea of I think oftentimes we hear folks talk about well, social media this and the world is like that, and I think as artists, as Christian artists, we need to engage in those worlds. We need to engage in those conversations. I think we sit there and it's like, well, the movies are just terrible. Well, we need Christian movie makers who are not just going to make things to a targeted audience. And I think that's where, in terms of the sense of vocation and calling, is how can we enhance that conversation in the field that we're in? When we market our work, we're not saying, oh, I'm a Christian artist here, I'm just looking at the church. We're putting our work out there into the public to basically engage in the conversation where it is. And I think in many regards, that's what the sense of calling is how can we engage in that conversation with the unbelieving world about who God is, and how can we show them what we have learned and what we believe in the work that we've done. And they're going to do that by seeing good work and being in relationship with people who are doing good work. And so, as alluded to earlier, that the concept of truth, beauty, and goodness, how can we show them something that's true? How can we show them something that's beautiful? How can we show them something that's good? And so I think that's the true sense of calling for me, particularly both teaching and also painting, is how can we change that conversation where it's not just, oh, this is all bad, be very careful of these arenas, but also we should be charging into those arenas in some ways because that's where the greatest need is. We need Christian painters, we need Christian musicians, and not just in their own little bubble where they're singing and painting for each other, but engaging with an unbelieving world where they look at your work and say, that is fantastic. Why? Tell me about your process. And then we can engage them about the gold line of eternity that ties everything together. That we can talk about the things being resolved and unresolved, because that's the Christian life, is things are resolved, and also there's the now and then there's the not yet. And so our vocation is about sharing our experience because it's coming from a Christian worldview. It's not going to be separate. We don't just do art on Monday through Saturday and then show up at church on Sunday. I mean, it's 7 days a week. And so I think where we need to be as artists, whether it's abstract or representational or musical or dramatic, is engaging that world to tell a better story, to tell the whole story. That not only is the world in great need, because it's not always pretty, but also there is a Redeemer who came and a Redeemer who can save.
Thank you so much. We have a lot of good questions, but a couple I did want to get to and ask you. So this is for Hilary. You mentioned building up your business. Can you speak to art as a business? Many don't think about that aspect of art.
Yeah, it's a job. It's a hard job. It's a great job. But, and then like many people who are self-employed, it's not just creating the work. But a lot of people, if you go to work, you have like a niche that you do, like you're in marketing, you're in sales, you're in whatever. But for an artist specifically, for us, it looks like I'm creating the work, I'm marketing the work, I'm running reports. I have I've got like quarterly reports and sales goals, and because we're a double income family, we need my income, and so I have monthly quotas I need to make and things like that. So like I have to get up, and two, I think people think like you wake up and you just like have your coffee, and then I was up all night just thinking, and then like eventually like 3 you start creating. If I did that, I wouldn't be broke. So it really, and the neat thing is it's like people think like you just like paint a lot when the inspiration hits you, and that's great if you can do it. But the interesting thing is there's a quote that we often like to refer to, and it's like oh crap, I'm forgetting, but it says the muse, oh yeah, that's right. People say, oh, I'm just waiting for the muse. And I say, the muse is out there, but you got to be working. It only finds you working. And so basically you get up every day, it's a routine, and it's amazing, like when you, I read this amazing book about managing your day, and it basically said like to be a successful creative, you have to be really boring. And which is the opposite of what people think creatives are. And so basically like you go to bed at a certain time, you drink a lot of water, you show up, you put your coffee mug here, and it's crazy how your brain is just like, oh, I'm in the studio, I'm smelling this, I'm seeing this, all right, let's get to work. And it's amazing, like I walk in thinking like, I'm so inspired today. And then like I sit down and it just is there, and the muse found me working. Does that answer the question?
I think so. Okay, because I'm aware of our time, as always. I'm going to ask you a couple questions that I think some of you have questions specifically about their pieces or an aspect of what they've described as their process or whatever. And one of the reasons we have them here and y'all here, so you can engage with them. You can talk with them afterwards or whatever, set up a time to talk to you about specific, because there are questions about those things. But I imagine some of you may be thinking, how can, say if this is sort of new, thinking about that there are Christians who are doing art not just in a Christian sphere, right, or for Christian purposes, but for just as a job or business or what you see as your calling, then how can we learn more about this, like a Christian approach to the art world or art, and how can we engage in that world?
It's a great question. One of the things, and I'm sure David will have some thoughts on this too, but is just to stay curious. Like we were talking about this a little bit before, and there's an artist who actually last week was mentioned in the talk. His name's Makoto Fujimura. He's a Japanese artist. He's unbelievable. Listen to, read, whatever you can get your hands on of his is awesome. We were talking about this early, though, and just saying how in a talk he gave, he talked about putting yourself, not approaching art as though it has something to offer you, but putting yourself underneath it as a student and asking questions, wondering why, because we also, I think it was 2 weeks ago, Sean also mentioned this too, just that all truth is God's truth. So, even a piece of work that you don't like or that you feel like you can't relate to, there's something true about it because we were all made in God's image, and whoever created that piece of work was made in God's image. And so there's something to be found in everything, even if it's, noticing again the depravity of man. Maybe that's all there is. Or noticing, beauty or truth or goodness or perseverance. There's a lot to be found if you just are curious. And so I think a lot, as I think about my work and I think about just engaging the art world in general, I think so much is about listening as much as it is about telling and about doing. It's just about asking questions and staying curious.
Yeah, and I think the other thing in terms of how, if the question's how can people engage with that? Yeah. I think a lot of it is just to just get out there and do it. And I mean that I think oftentimes people think that they need an invitation to try. Every day I have students walk in the door and they tell me, I am not creative at all. And kind of my response to that is, well, have you ever lied? And they're like, what do you mean? They're like, well, yeah. I'm like, that's creativity just with a sinful bend. You know what time you came in, you know what your curfew was, and you came up with a beautiful story that had nothing to do with the truth. You are very creative and you can engage in this world. And so the biggest thing is to engage and to try, because there are artists out there that Like, if you walk up there and ask them, they will tell you all about their process. They will tell you about probably more than you ever wanted to know, right? But part of that is you have to show up you have to show up to see, you have to show up to do, you have to, pick up the brush. Like, that paint did not just jump on the canvas by itself. There are decisions that were made, and we need people to, be those participants, okay? And it's not an age, it's not a skill. It's part of it is just the experience of showing up. As Hilary kind of said, it's like, every single day you have to show up. There are some days where our work just sits in the bin. We take it and we're like, ooh, not a good day. Put it off the side. And I think you'll have those days, but that's okay because you're engaging in a creative process that is in the reflection of a creative God. So in terms of how to engage, I would sit there and say I would show up, I would talk, I would engage, I would try, experiment, because there's a lot more in your being that is creative and artistic because you're made in the image of God than you're allowing yourself to be.
Well, thank y'all so much for doing this. We really appreciate it. It's been a gift for y'all to be here and to share what, I know it's not easy to share putting your babies out here, for us to look at, that you spend so much time and labor over, but we really appreciate it. It's a gift to us. So, Sean, would you close us?